Did the Phillies potentially find a diamond in the rough in the Rule 5 draft yesterday? We'll talk about it next right here on the PHLY Phillies podcast. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the PHLY Phillies podcast. Tyler Zulli here, and I thought today we would take a look at the Rule 5 results from yesterday. If you remember on Monday's show, we discussed who made the Phillies lose, which they did in fact lose Griff McGarry, and who they might end up drafting if they do decide to make a selection with the 29th pick in the Rule 5 draft. They end up selecting reliever Zach McCambley from the Miami Marlins AAA team, the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp. And while I talked yesterday about the unlikelihood of the Phillies actually keeping the Rule 5 selection based on kind of like both the last decade of trends of what they've done with Rule 5 picks and the fact that the roster does feel pretty solidified with the exception of big league caliber players being either signed or traded for this offseason, I think Zach McCambley might actually be the exception to that rule. Let's take a look at what he did last year in 2025 in AA across two levels, AA and AAA for that matter. He threw a majority of his innings for the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp. Listen, I think the team's entirely irrelevant with who he pitched for. I just think it's a funny name. I'm just going to say it as many times as I can. But what is not irrelevant are the numbers that McCambley produced. You take a look here at the numbers across the board, electrifying stuff in terms of the strikeout numbers. The strikeout to walk ratio is really good as well. And I love the fact that he was keeping that whip just north of 1 because he limited the walks so much. Just 22 walks in 62 innings pitched, which comes out to be a walk in 2.8 innings pitched, or one walk per 2.8 innings pitched. So basically, he's only issuing one walk every 3 innings pitched. The opponent batting average last year was 219, and the expected batting average was just 226. So the real life numbers and the computer metric numbers really kind of balance each other well, and it really shows you the strong season that McCambley had as a right-handed reliever in AAA in the Marlins organization last year. And then, of course, the 62 innings pitched over 42 appearances means that there's probably a good chance that he could be a multi-inning guy out of the bullpen. And in fact, he was a starting pitcher until 2022. Now, he was once the 23rd ranked prospect in the Marlins system, didn't really work out as a starter, but was moved to the bullpen after the 2022 season and had started to elevate himself as one of the big-time players that was thought about in the Rule 5 draft. So for the Phillies to get him at 29th, and I know there were a handful of teams that passed, but there were a handful of players that were selected before him. I think the Phillies were very intentional with the decision that they made to go get a reliever with the thought that maybe this could be their low leverage guy. You saw Max Lazar in those spots last year before being DFA'd. Carlos Hernandez and Jose Ruiz were in those spots, and a handful of different guys. Seth Johnson still could be in that role. But I do think that even though the Phillies have not really used the Rule 5 draft to bring in players, we mentioned Tyler Goeddel was the last one that stuck on a roster for a full season. McCambley might be the guy that kind of bucks that trend a little bit. And by the way, he tossed an immaculate inning last year, which is a really cool feat. For those that don't know, an immaculate inning is 9 pitches, 9 strikes, 3 strikeouts. And he did that last year in AAA, which is, nothing to write home about, but I think it's a pretty cool feat in and of itself. But what jumps out to me when you looked at that stat sheet that we just showed you are the metrics on his Savant page. So what we did was we used the qualifier of pitchers that have thrown at least 500 pitches last season and are under the age of 30 to kind of get you an idea of where prospects lie and where he sits heading into his age 27 season. You come away with an incredible 31% strikeout rate and a 35.7% whiff rate in AAA alone. And the whiff rate gets even better if you include his time in AA. Strikeout rate goes down a very small percentage, but it's a percentage of a percentage, really. But his whiff rate gets even better. His walk rates in AAA were in the 83rd percentile, and he was under 9% walk rate for the entire season. And the big ones for me that jump out, as you know, when I talk about pitchers like Ranger Suarez, why I fall in love with these types of pitchers, it's a combination of average exit velocity, barrel rates, and hard hit percentages, and McCambley falls in line with all of those at a pretty good rate at the AAA level. He gave up an 86.4 average exit velocity for the season in the 87th percentile. Barrel rates at just 4.2%, the 86th percentile, and then his hard hit rates, while they weren't as high in terms of percentile, were still fairly good. 34.7% put him in the 70th percentile across AAA last year. The big one for me that stands out in that regard is the 86.4 miles per hour average exit velocity. If you took pitchers in Major League Baseball last year that threw at least 200 pitches and compared that to the 86.4 that McCambley put together in AAA, there would have only been 5 pitchers in the entirety of Major League Baseball that threw at least 200 pitches that would have been able to beat that mark. And in fact, when we talk about Ranger Suarez, it was 0.1 miles an hour better than Rangers 86.5 for the entirety of the season. So there's no question to me that the metrics are all there across the minor league level. Of course, the question is, can he do that at the major league level? That, to me, is where the stuff starts to kind of get called into play. Now, this is a right-handed pitcher who does not throw particularly hard. Fastball velocity sits in the mid 93 to 94 range, but the fastball is not his most utilized pitch. In fact, it's not even his second most utilized pitch. For McCambley, he throws 5 different pitches, and I guess you could call it 6 if you want to factor in the changeup that he used 0.2% of the time. But he really is a 5-pitch pitcher who has a heavy cutter slider overlay that makes up almost 70% of the pitches that he threw last year. And again, he's not a crazy velo guy. That cutter sat below 90 miles an hour on average, and the four-seamer, as we said, only averaged just over 94. But he gets the most out of the stuff with pretty good control and with pretty good pitch mix. Who does that remind you of? We talk about it all the time. Ranger Suarez. Now, I'm not comparing these two guys. One is a career minor leaguer who is a 27-year-old who has not pitched in the major leagues. The other one is a pretty established starting pitcher in Major League Baseball. But the idea is that these guys who don't throw particularly hard have to keep the ball down, have to mix speeds and location, have to throw a lot of strikes, and they have to be able to limit hard contact. And that's what McCambley has done with his cutter slider overlay. Now, one guy that I really value on Twitter, his name is Thomas Nestico. He goes by TJ Stats on Twitter. It's somebody that I really respect for his pitching breakdowns. Thomas has McCambley's cutter graded as a 105 stuff plus, so about 5% greater than league average at 100. The big pitch, though, is the slider that sits at about a 114 stuff plus, so it's 14% better than the average slider across Major League Baseball, or across minor league baseball in this instance. The slider, I think, has some really good glove side run that what I've been able to watch, and I think it does generate a pretty good amount of swing and miss stuff, specifically to right-handed hitters. Now, in AAA last year, his slider got a 50.7% whiff rate, and opponents' expected slash line, 125, 140, 168. So on that slider specifically, that is his out pitch. The cutter is the get-ahead pitch. The slider is the put-away pitch. And then he'll mix in the other stuff along the way, the fastball, the sinker, a couple of other pitches at lower percentage. But those 4 are really the ones that stand out, and it's the cutter and the slider that does most of the work and therefore most of the damage. Cutter has a little bit of good humpback movement at the end. He's willing to throw it to both righties and lefties. It's a pretty even split between the pitch. And kind of in that same vein of when we talk about Matt Strahm, willing to challenge guys with that pitch, either lefties on the hand or running it away from right-handed hitters. Now, with the slider, going back to that for just a moment, the one thing that I thought was really intriguing, that 31.7% chase rate that we talked about, I went and I tried to compare it to some of the other right-handed relievers that have been in the Phillies bullpen last year, not including Joan Duran, but the 3 that I had, none of them had more than 27% chase rate on their the entirety of their pitches. Orion Kerkering was 25.1%. David Robertson was 27%. He was the leader. Jordan Romano only had 24.1% on his chase rates, and you know how ineffective he was. So for McCambley, at least at the AAA level, his chase rates are better than what we saw from the 3 guys at the Major League level, not named Duran. Now, again, this is not to say I'm comparing him to the guys that pitch at the major leagues. It's just to give you context at what type of pitcher McCambley could be. I think that while they have not kept many of their Rule 5 picks, and in fact are now going on almost a decade between 2026, this season coming up, and 2016, the last time a player was on the roster in Tyler Goodell, I think that there is a good chance. I gave it an 85 no, 15 yes chance before the Rule 5. I've upped that number now. I'm going to go 60% no, 40% yes, but that's a significant jump from what I was talking about just about 24 hours ago. I think there is a much better chance than what I envisioned for McCambley specifically to make this team on the opening day roster. I think that they'll probably start him in low leverage situations, but he might be a right-handed reliever that they could trust with a cutter slider mix that does generate some good or limited contact, I should say, good contact in the right direction for a relief pitcher or any pitcher for that matter. This guy looks to be the part, and I would be interested to see how he fares in spring training against some more major league caliber hitters. But even at the age of 27, this might be an opportunity for the Phillies to have a diamond in the rough, buy low type of scenario where if they could solidify the front end of their bullpen for relatively cheap and do it at the Rule 5 level, I think this is a really good step for the Phillies roster construction. I'm not saying definitively he's going to make the team, but I am much more convinced with McCambley specifically that he could theoretically make the team out of camp than any of the players hypothetically that I thought about yesterday on the podcast. So does McCambley make the team? We'll obviously have to wait and see. But I do think his stuff might play at the major league level, and I am interested to take a look at him when the Phillies break camp in Clearwater and to see if he is going to be on the 26th when they head back to Philadelphia for opening day.